2, 1, go. All right, so what we're going to be doing is talking about the ego resistance chart. Before I get to the ego resistance chart, I just want to do a brief covering of some different words that people may not have heard. And again, I'm not an expert on duality. I'm not an expert on the ego. It's just really a student of and observing of. But it helps if you're going to use these terms, you better sort of have a working knowledge, at least from your perspective, because some of the people may not have a working knowledge, and they have a conscious mind. So even though a lot of the work that we're doing is in the subconscious brain and the energy field, because they have that conscious mind, it's a learning computer, that's where their free will lies, you've got to give them some data, right? Because we're both. It's not left or right brain, which is a self-duality, right? It's both. It's always both. So from our perspective, the word duality is going to imply separation, right? It's separation. And so from the perspective of the ego, which the ego is edging God and others out, the ego itself is just it's an exaggerated survival mechanism. That if you're a human being, you do have an ego, and the ego has been, whether it's the evolution of the brain, the reptilian brain, which evolves into other parts of the brain, or just part of being a human being, the ego is going to keep you alive in severe circumstances. So it's a survival mechanism. However, what it seems like is that the ego, as it's developed, has become an exaggerated survival response. It's exaggerated. And this thing called ego is associated with survival of the body, right? So ego is involved as an exaggerated response of survival with the body. Just follow me at this point. And based upon the ego itself, because it only sees from a very limited perspective, it tends to be naive, it tends to be very gullible, and it tends to be tunnel vision. It only sees a little bit of life. And because it's a hyperbole response, it only sees life as from one or two perspectives. Because based on survival, I have to have this to survive, which is the attachment or the desire, and then I don't want that. And that's the aversion. So the ego is it's never happy. It's always vigilant because it's about survival. All right? And it tends to be very, 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 very narrow in its thinking. It's a hyperbole, exaggerated response. It's not happy. It's not at peace. It's always in a place of want, don't want. Want, don't want. And Dr. Hawkins came up with, I remember one of the videos he was talking about, you want to understand the ego, go down into the Caribbean and you're scuba diving. And for us, when we're scuba diving at 40 feet, everything looks beautiful. You're in the fish tank. And it's beautiful, the corals, the flora, the fauna. That's for us as people, and we're observing all this. However, down there, everything is survival-based. So you have one little fishy swimming in front of another fishy, and it eats it. And that's what's happening down there. So now you can start to observe your ego, that anything that passes in front of your eyes or your ears, when the ego's in charge, which it's always running, it's going to go, I want it. I don't want it. I want it. I don't want it. There's no logic. There's no higher realms to it. It's just, I want it. I don't want it. We've all heard of these celebrities or politicians or movie stars, and you go, are you bonkers with what they do? Like, I want, I don't want. I want, I don't want. Because there's no logic to it. And you understand that the ego was driving it at that point, right? There's no logic, there's no higher realms. And so you understand they were living and acting in their ego. The reality of the situation that we're talking about, the big picture, is divinity expressing itself through all of creation. That's what's happening all the time. All the time. It can't be anything other than that. And then people get into their lower brain and they go, show me. Prove it to me. And that's a whole nother discussion. But that's the big picture. So what I would like us to see, instead of seeing life from win, lose, loss, gain, better than, less than, good, bad, then I'd have to say, who set those parameters about what is win, lose? what is good, bad? What is gain, loss? What is winner? What is loser? Well, of course, I set that. Which means, who am I? I'm God. Really? And then you understand the ego, because the ego goes, well, I'm the one who sets the rules and the regulations, and then you see the suffering. Right? You see the suffering. Not that I'm in union with the divine, and if I'm in union with the divine, there's no win-lose anyways. It's all win-win. That's how you know when you're playing win-lose, gain-loss, better than, less than, good, bad, you're in duality. And duality implies battle. Right? There's a battle going on. So you know when you're in your ego, you're in fight or flight. And if you're in fight or flight, you're going to engage the fight or flight response. We're going to engage adrenaline, hormones, muscles, ligaments, tendons, fight or flight, or fright, and the ego has the five F's, right? Fight, flight, fright, fornicate, and feed. So if you want to know what runs the ego, because it's survival, so it's an individual survival, right? My individual, but it's a survival of the species too. So that's just what's running the ego. So what I would like to look at it from a perspective of is it's a gradient. It's a gradient. So if we have light and we have dark, and you say, what is dark in relationship to light? People would say what? Not, I know some of you guys understand it, but what do most people say dark is in relationship to light?
Opposite.
The opposite, okay? Then they're in duality. Because light and dark are not opposite, because opposite is making the presumption or the assumption of there's a battle. And it's not a battle. Light and dark is the absence of light. It's the absence. And light is the dark is the absence of light. Light is the absence of dark, which implies choice. You get to choose light, which is the absence of dark, virtue, which is the absence of vice, dark, which is the absence of virtue or light. Does that make sense? Now you understand why the soul comes here. Because it sets up a gradient of choice. So it's like a thermometer, right? It's just hot, less hot, less hot, less hot. When we're at the 50% mark, it's what we would call cold, cold, cold. But it's just the absence of. And you see this in nature, all right? So it sets up a gradient, it sets up choice, and that's what we're here for. Does that make sense to everybody? And once and so when you're working with a person and you give them one word or the other, you go, well, let's say this word is love, and this word is hate. Why would you want to play with the absence of love? Unless there's a payoff to it, or unless you've been bushwhacked when you had an experience where you're in a state of love and something not perceived or pleasant happened, right? So that's the context that we're setting. I know there's other contexts, but this whole gradient, implies choice, which is why the soul is here. We have free will. It's to wake us up and to choose. What do you choose, child? You know, those are from The Color of Purple, right? Child, what do you choose? So it allows choice. Here's another thing that this implies. I am not the body, but I have a body. I am not the relationships, I am not the family, I am not the husband, I am not the wife, I am not the religion, I am not the skin, I am not the nose hairs, I am not the shoes, I am not the title, but I have all that. That's part of physicality, right? It's part of this, but I'm not that. Well, what am I? I am the soul. See, so that recontextualizes how I see myself. And that means the things that are temporary I don't freak out about. I can participate in them, right? But I'm not freaked out about it. Because even if the worst possible scenario happens, then what I am not, what passes is not you. That's the body. And I want to be in the body as long as I can to serve and to love and to grow and to learn. That's correct, yes. So I have to brush my teeth, and I have to feed my body, and I have to do all those things of the body because the soul spirit wants to be here to learn and grow and to serve. Does that make sense? So I have to love my horsey It's your horsey. Who's seen the movie Avatar? Did you get that? When the back of the ponytail of the person and the back of the horsey intertwined, that's the connection of spirit, soul, body. But when spirit, soul takes off, body goes back into the ground because it's temporary, and spirit, soul transitions so you don't die. You, soul, spirit, doesn't die. Body goes back into the ground because it's always been temporal. So I am not that, I am the soul. So that recontextualizes, which really, when we're doing this type of work, if we can do that type of the work from that place, serve the work. Charles talks about that. If you serve the work, it's so much easier for us. And if you say, I'm the soul and they're the soul, there's already a link. Then you don't get caught up with the cancer that's in the body. Or the ADD that's temporary. Do you see what I'm saying? You just don't get, the diagnoses and the conditions of the body, the finances, it's temporary. So if you don't put your attention, by the law of attraction, if you don't put your attention on that, you put your attention on soul, serving that soul that's on the table. If you're putting your attention on soul, serving the soul, watch what happens. And you're much more effective for them because you're coming from soul. We know the law of attraction. And that's really, and that there's no more pressure on you. Oh my gosh, I don't have to fix them. Because you know in your conscious mind, you go, I'm not that smart. And if they can't fix themselves, how can I fix them? There's no fixing. All right? So what dies is temporary. So what causes the suffering out of the naivety and the gullibility of the mind of a child? Remember, we're programmed way before 10. You know, you get the information from the mother's line, the father's line, whatever comes in, the society, whatever gets into that brain, and it has no discernment. That brain, the brain of a child, has no discernment of what's higher, what's lower, what serves me, what's not, right? So it's the over-identification with the body or the ego, people, places, circumstances, events, that creates suffering because it's focused on temporary, which creates the lower emotions, which creates the fight or flight response. You can just turn that.